And Bill, when we went out of that last segment, I think there was another point you wanted to hit on, and then I want to bring you back to a comment John Bolton made recently, but why don't you finish your thought because you were kind of interrupted.
The point we were trying to emphasize was, could this disaster in Jeremiah's prophecy of Elam be generated by an earthquake because of the seismic nature of the area over there, or really does this prophecy specify more like a war? And I'm leaning in the direction of it's a war rather than an earthquake, and there's several clues for that. One, we're told that Iran or Elam has enemies, plural. So the Lord is going to judge them. He's fiercely angered, but it also says Iran will be dismayed before its enemies, plural. And presently, Iran has three big enemies. One, of course, is Israel, who's concerned that Iran's going to get a nuclear weapon and wipe them off the map. Two is the Arab states, especially those Sunni states, those GCC states that share the coastline of the Persian Gulf on the other side from Iran. They're concerned about Iran trying to spread its Shiite hegemony throughout the region and overpower the region. And also they're very concerned about, like we talked about in the previous segment, about that Bashar nuclear plant contaminating their existence over there with the radioactive disaster. And then the third enemy we'd have to put into focus, and that's why the 5+1 is trying to negotiate with Iran, is the international community, because Iran has threatened terrorism, especially to America, supposedly have terrorist cells embedded through the Hezbollah over here in America. And, all those types of things are very concerning, especially they've said they would shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which would then choke off Arab oil to world markets. So there's concerns in all those areas. And it also says, lastly, Jan, that it says in the prophecy that the Elamites, they'll be consumed by the sword. So in other words, that would tend to be biblically a reference to a military campaign.
I think you believe this is probably an imminent event. Is that right, this Elam issue?
I really do. We talked about that. When we look at a prophecy, we have to see if there are any requirements that still need to be met.
Right.
And the way I look at this right now, the three big ones were the Lord had to be fiercely angered, which I can point out the three reasons he is angered, and I'll do it briefly in a second. Two is, when the disaster occurs, it has to lead to a worldwide expulsion, a diaspora, and we would see that if that nuclear reactor was affected, that would create radioactive disaster. That certainly could create that type of humanitarian crisis. And then the other big one, the timing of it had to be in the latter years, because the very last verse says this will happen in the latter years. Same kind of reference that Ezekiel 38 has, by the way. So these are both end times prophecies. And from my viewpoint, I think you would agree, Jan, we're living in the latter years. So real quickly, the Lord is angry with Iran for three reasons right now. One is they want to destroy the nation of Israel and are about to try to get a nuclear weapon to accomplish that. Two is they are forcing the Iranians to worship Satan, which is a pagan god, and we're told in Isaiah 46 that there's only one God. That's the God of the Bible, Jehovah. We're told in Nahum 1 that he is a jealous God for all the right reasons. He's got to be distraught with the fact that they are forcing the worship, and it's repressive. Not just on the Christian Shem. It's social injustice, too. If a woman doesn't wear her headdress or hijab, she can be thrown in jail. There's stories of that. I mean, it's very repressive. You've got to do exactly what they want. And then third, and I think this is strike three, is the persecution of the Christians. They are actively shutting down home churches and trying to stomp out Christianity, but it's not working. Christianity is growing. So I think all the prerequisites are in place. I think this is an imminent prophecy. I think it precedes Ezekiel 38 and 39, and it may very well precede that, including Arab-Israeli war in Psalm 83. It might actually lead to that wider conflict.
Well, the Bible outlines an awful lot of activity there in the last days. The timing, of course, is uncertain with most of what it outlines from this particular issue with Elam. And folks, that's spelled E-L-A-M, if you're wondering. And Psalm 83, which probably is imminent as well, strike on Damascus, Isaiah 17. We've got the Ezekiel 38-39, known as Gog and Magog invasion, probably involving Russia with some allies that are outlined in Ezekiel 38-39. We've got this conflict that we've been talking about here for the last 30 minutes or so. Bill, off air, we talked a little bit about a John Bolton comment. Review that for us, because anything John Bolton says, I listen up.
Yes, former UN Ambassador John Bolton came out publicly in the summer, I think it was August of 2010, which was when Russian fuel rods were loaded into the Bashar nuclear plant. And he said at that time, because the thought that Israel might strike Iran's nuclear program had been discussed several years prior, and it was of concern even back then in summer of 2010. He had said that the deadline to strike that nuclear facility was when those Russian fuel rods were in place, because a strike on that facility would create potential to create a nuclear disaster in that area, as we were talking about. That is a concern. So he had made that comment. And it's interesting. I shared a platform with former UN Ambassador John Bolton in September 2011. On September 11th, we actually shared a platform in Los Angeles on the 10-year anniversary of the Twin Towers being toppled on 2001. And we had a banquet the night before. And the question was asked of John Bolton specifically, what was the position of America going to be on striking Israel's facility? Now, this was back in 2011. And he said he was thoroughly convinced that then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and former Secretary of Defense Gates had convinced Barack Obama to go with containment of Iran's nuclear program and not elimination or dismantlement and striking Iran, because the consequences would be too grave for the region and for America. And what do we see today in negotiations with the P5+1? We see Israel getting very concerned because they want a total dismantlement, like they want with that Syrian chemical weapons program, which is being dismantled. But that is not what the P5+1 is pursuing. They're pursuing containment, and that's definitely of concern for Israel.